Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Directors Club podcast. I'm your host, Jim Laskowski, giving you an episode here right at the very start of February, only due to the fact that I'm going to be spending most of this month prepping for the big 1994 retrospective with Colin and Eric, which everybody looks forward to, and that will come out in early March. But before that nostalgic madness begins, I've kind of been delaying a little bit on this particular filmmaker, at least for the past 3 months, because life gets in the way or things kept coming up or I decided to do something else. But I've delayed this long enough, and this includes my good friend and returning guest. We are both eager to discuss the work of another revered French New Wave filmmaker. I needed someone very smart and passionate about film to help me. Welcome back to the show, the great Kate Blair.
Thank you. That's very flattering.
Oh, yeah. I know you have a degree in this stuff, and you have a real sense of, film history. And I know that we covered Agnes Varda, right, in the past. So it kind of makes sense.
It does make sense. And I am a huge fan of this director. So I'm really, really grateful that you invited me to talk about him. Because I am very excited to do that.
Yeah, he's another groundbreaking director of that same ilk, that same time and place. I know it's not just French New Wave, but he was considered, Left Bank, is that what they were sort of like grouped together? I want to say.
Yeah, he and Chris Marker and Agnes Varda, I think, were the ones who were sort of like grouped together by historians as a subset of the French New Wave called the Left Bank. And I think none of them really would have agreed that they were involved in a new wave, which is like what I kind of like about them. But they're all extremely brilliant, and Resnais in particular, and Varda. I don't have favorites. I think they're all just incredibly brilliant filmmakers.
I agree.
But I love that. I think if I'm remembering right, Resnais, he was an editor on Agnes Varda's La Pointe Court. And I think that kind of inspired him actually to make his own movies, which is really exciting.
Yeah, he came at it from an editor. He also, started out with an interest in theater, which makes complete sense, especially when you see him film like last year at Marienbad. But yeah, I mean, before we get to all that, though, I want to just ask really quickly, since it's been a while since we've connected, here on the show, at least, before we dive into the work of Resnais, tell me what you've been up to lately. And have you seen any films from 2023 that really stood out for you? Because we just did our year-end episode. I'd be curious if you'd seen something that's stood out and really made an impact on you in any way.
Yeah, I didn't do a great job keeping up. I haven't been doing a great job keeping up with contemporary films in general, but I did see Anatomy of a Fall, and I really loved that. And I'm really kind of obsessed with Sandra Hüller, and I saw her in The Zone of Interest also. So those were like my two big 2023 movies. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed Anatomy of a Fall. I'd like to see it again. I just think, I don't know. I think the French courtroom drama is so interesting compared to the American one. I don't know. Did you see this movie at all?
I sure did. It made my top 10 of the year for sure. I agree with the portrayal of a French courtroom is very interesting, very unique, because I'm not used to they're not necessarily like shouting matches, but they certainly interrupt, each other to where there's less monologuing. In American courts with our lawyers, they tend to do that. They tend to just like speak one at a time, and here it's more like a conversation at times where like, oh, wait a minute, let me interrupt here. And I was like, geez,
Right.
This is very different than what I'm used to seeing in a courtroom drama.
Right. Like I've definitely never been in a French courtroom, but I can't imagine that it's actually like that. But I really enjoy like the dramatics of it, the way it's portrayed here. It was very silly, but mostly I just like was really, really impressed by the performances in it, and especially Sandra Hüller. How just like I don't know, you really just cannot tell what happened there. She just does such a good job of sort of, I don't know, suppressing and hiding. And I just thought her performances in and out of the courtroom were really fascinating to watch. Plus, the dog gives a great performance as well.
Yeah. Oh, the dog should have been nominated. I mean, geez.
And yeah, just I can't get over sort of the 50 Cent. I think that's I just think that detail is like incredible, and I just am never going to get over it that that's the song that's playing during the central incident of this film. Just like a wordless version of that. I just really enjoyed pretty much all of that film. And I'm curious about what you saw that stood out for you this year too.
Well, it's interesting because there's another great film playing at the Music Box currently that is a little bit in conversation with Anatomy of a Fall, in that I think it's about not knowing, a lack of closure, and basically an inciting incident that we don't know the truth behind. And that's a movie called The Teacher's Lounge, which is out of Germany. And I wrote a review. I got to talk to the director, and that was like both that and Anatomy of a Fall, I think, would make for a great double feature, but also the types of movies where you immediately want to talk to people about what they think happened. Mm-hmm. And I love that experience because the movie is not going to spell it out for you. And you sort of have to come up with your own conclusions, but and they're very character driven, and they're sort of like these microcosms of the way society, the way we interact with one another and approach conflict or approach a certain situation from different perspectives is kind of captured in both films. And just like there's such anxiety about irresolution and not knowing. And I kind of went like, these are the types of movies I think should be embraced, should win awards, because they're not spoon feeding you. They're asking you to use your intellect, but also at the same time, you're completely emotionally immersed in what's taking place. Like you're really involved with it. So Teacher's Lounge, I think you absolutely will respond to, and I think most people who have seen it have in some way or another. It's kind of infuriating at times just because the way people react, especially when children are involved, it could be really harrowing. So I mean, I recommend that, especially if you're a fan of Anatomy of a Fall. But Zone of Interest is one that it made my top 20, but I'm wrestling with it still. It's, again, like a lot of movies these days, and I say this quite often, where I don't know if somebody just did like a supercut of how many times I say this on the podcast, it would probably be its own episode. But I need to see it again. Based on what, like it was just really hard to take. It was really hard to watch, and I could see not wanting to watch it again because of how it affects you. But also, it was just like there's things about it that I was kind of surprised by, and I don't know if I entirely understood on a first viewing, including. I mean, I get what happens at the end, and we don't necessarily need to go into great spoiler detail about like a certain jump ahead in time, which I thought was incredibly powerful in that film.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Probably one of the best moments of the entire film, but still, just there are those night vision scenes.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah. There's just like things throughout that movie, and the sound design and the score. Like, I think it is a lot like when I saw Under the Skin, in that I don't know if I entirely understood everything he's going for thematically, but like on a technical level, it's kind of incredible. And that's what I always look forward to his work, and he doesn't make that many movies, but I'm always kind of astonished by everything surrounding the way he tells a story. It's just the camera work, the acting. I mean, just everything about it kind of floored me, but I didn't feel like a sense of shock and awe in the way that I thought I might. But I think that's also part of the point of the film, is to not, because we're not seeing, it's all suggested. It's not really taking place right in front of us. We just kind of know based on context what's taking place in that film. But
Right, definitely.
yeah, it's challenging. It's very challenging. So, I mean, that one definitely, but I mean, the movie I've talked about extensively already on the last episode, but it's still something I hope people will make an effort to see. It's called Falcon Lake, which is out of Quebec. And a movie I really think you'll strongly respond to. You Can Live Forever, which is also, I want to say it's out of Quebec. It might be just Montreal or Toronto. I can't remember specifically where it's from, but that's a queer love story that takes place in the, I want to say, mid to late 90s, and it involves one of the characters who's religiously devoted, becoming a Jehovah's Witness, and is experiencing a lot of pressure from the family and is afraid to come out, and then develops a relationship with somebody that is just, I like it. It was just one of those movies where I'm watching and I go, I've experienced something like this around the exact same time. So it's partially like a coming of age. Both movies are kind of a coming of age story, but it's just about first love. Like, both movies are about the first time you really felt something for somebody else, and both movies just sort of captured it so beautifully. And I guess I just love movies about first love, because those were the two that topped my list.
Yeah.
And I also think you'll really appreciate them. I really want to explore, just based on that, like, more Canadian cinema, because every time I come across something from that country, I'm like, wow, this is really speaking to me. And I've been a huge fan of Denis Villeneuve, going all the way back to like his early films. So I actually picked up a book via interlibrary loan through the Chicago Public Library, all about Canadian cinema, that I'm just going to kind of go through and jot down some titles and sort of make my own watch list for the year.
Yeah, that's fun. I mean, Cronenberg is my favorite Canadian director, probably.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely a strong example.
Yeah, lots of good ones.
Yeah, for sure. But no, I'm glad you got to catch up with those particular movies, because, oof. But it's a lot to take, especially, yeah. I mentioned that the reenactment with the dog moment in Anatomy of a Fall. It's just, oh boy.
Oh yeah, that Palm Dog win was deserved for sure.
Yeah, and that the young boy Milo Machado Grainer, who plays Daniel. Wow.
Yeah.
Another great
Yeah,
performance.
that kid was really good.
So do you think she did it?
Man, I don't know. I mean, I don't.
It's also not the point, I don't think. I
It's really not the point. And I think I think my answer is like kind of both, and that's like how the film left me. Is it's kind of like, it was both. That's like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I like that answer. Also, Past Lives. Have you caught up with Past Lives?
No, but I do want to see that.
Yes, I can pretty much guarantee you'll love that one as well.
Yeah, I've heard great things about that.
Yeah, it was a pretty good year, I gotta say. Like, I mean, I think I said this in the episode, but also just there were a lot of very good movies, but I wouldn't say like there was all out and out masterpieces to make it like a stellar year for cinema where it was just like, oh my God, I can't believe we got this movie and that movie and this movie. Because we've been spoiled some years, like 1999, of course, and 2007. There's just movies like you when you see a bunch of masterpieces, it's kind of rare. So I still say it's a good year for movies when you can get a bunch of very good movies and a few of them being great movies all in one year. So
yeah, it just occurred to me, everyone's doing retrospectives of 1999. Is that because it's been 25 years?
Oh wow, yeah, I guess so. You're right. I hadn't thought of that, but geez. I mean, we're probably gonna get inundated now with that. I mean, we always go back 30 years to go, to do our own little retrospective. And 1994, I don't know if I would say it's an incredible year for movies because a lot of them that I've gone back to are just fine. Whereas, I mean, there's some unbelievable, groundbreaking films, and certainly the whole Forrest Gump versus Pulp Fiction debate of the time of that year was kind of interesting, and it still is really, because there are people who kind of say one is better than the other, and I have a hard time saying like I don't know, I'm weird. I love them both, so I don't know. But yeah, and that was kind of the first year too where I officially decided that I just want to see as many movies as I can because I saw Pulp Fiction. So 1994, interesting year. It'll come up in greater detail, probably an overlong episode in about a month. So I hope people are excited for that. And yeah, I mean, I'm just excited to see what this year has in store because it's kind of I'm hearing interesting things out of Sundance already about certain titles. So I forgot her name. Actually, it might be they, but the director of We're All Going to the World's Fair.
Oh yeah, Jane Schoenbrunn.
Yes.
Yeah, they do have another film coming out, I think, and it has which musician in it? It has the Snail Mail musician in it.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Something like that. Yeah, I'm always excited about their movies for sure.
Yes. I'm very excited for that too. Man. Anyway, let's go ahead and talk about the director of this episode, because we've got quite a few titles, and some of which I would say are a bit of are kind of enigmas to piece together. And like we mentioned, he sort of started out having an interest in theater, but then he transitioned into being an editor. And then around like the late 40s, he kind of initiated a series of short films, all kinds of subjects, everything from Van Gogh to Pablo Picasso's painting, and a couple of other interesting things that I'll talk about later for sure. But like his short films is where he started out with, and I think he's collaborated with Chris Marker on a couple of them as well. So yeah, I mean, that's basically where he started out with, to the point where the first feature film we're going to be discussing was commissioned as a documentary initially. That's Hiroshima Mon Amour, of course. And it makes sense because, the short film that sort of put him on the map is the incredibly harrowing Night and Fog, speaking of zone of interest. And it's again, an incredibly difficult watch, but a vital one. I mean, it's something that when you see it, you will never forget it. And it showcases his strengths as, a storyteller in the short narrative form. And it kind of makes sense to why he would be asked to do something similar with what happened in Hiroshima. But that it sort of evolved on its own in a way once he brought on French writer Marguerite Duras. What was your first experience with Resnais? Was it Hiroshima Mon Amour?
My first experience was Marie and Bod, and I watched both that and Hiroshima as an undergrad, in different film classes, but as an undergrad. But I fell in love with Hiroshima, especially immediately. I really, really love this movie. I have a really hard time choosing favorite movies. But this definitely, every time I'm asked like what some of my favorite movies are, this one comes up. So I feel pretty safe in saying it's one of my favorites. It's so beautiful to me. And I have a poster of this on my wall. I just like really love this movie a lot. And I think having watched a lot of Resnais recently, I don't think he's like unemotional, but I think this is maybe his most emotional film to me. I feel like this one really expresses love in the purest way, in a way that's really beautiful. It's very, I don't know, in addition to being incredibly political and incredibly dark, it also is just like a beautiful, beautiful love story, and one of my favorite love stories that's ever been on film. So this is like the main reason I was really excited to talk to you about this director, because I love this movie so much. I love all of his movies, but this one in particular. But yeah, what about you? What was your first time seeing this?
Yes, I had heard a lot about this film. And it's interesting because I didn't know what to expect, especially since the score that kicks in, very early on. I was like, whoa, I don't know if I've ever heard a score like this before. This is kind of eerie and unusual. It really took me aback at first. And going back and watching all of his work, you do really get a strong sense of thematic coherence in terms of what he's interested in, for sure, because there's certainly this idea of like memory being a shadow that follows us everywhere. Mm-hmm. is kind of something that he's talking about, like nearly every film, the sense of time and displacement and how we're carrying these memories along with us, along with a sense of guilt, but also the fact that memory changes over time. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's interesting to revisit this movie, especially after watching a bunch of his work, because to me, you're absolutely right in that it feels like it does feel like the movie that emotion is at the center instead of just the usual thematic interests. It does feel like it's about feeling a lot, and these characters are feeling a lot. And I think almost the very first couple of lines kind of sums up a lot of his work, in that one character says, or she says, I saw everything. And he says, you saw nothing in Hiroshima. And it's sort of like the paradoxical nature of remembrance and two different perspectives from two different life experiences, but they're also intertwined together. They're also experiencing the same feelings of desire together. And it's just, it's really powerful to watch these two people, even if a lot of it is just them having conversations together. But that opening sequence is one of the most incredible things I've ever seen in a movie, period.
Absolutely.
Just the contrast, of course, that's kind of something that's pretty obvious when you're watching it. Just the ashes turning into dew and sweat, and just like that whole thing is just unreal. I need to see this on the big screen.
I never have either. It's true.
Just for that whole opening. And yeah, I mean, it just, I don't know. I don't know if it's because of having, the writer who wrote the screenplay really brings a sense of longing and loss in a way that does feel a little bit more, I guess, engaging on an emotional level than some of his other films. Like a lot of his other films to me feel like puzzles, but not necessarily like I don't feel a sense of overwhelming love going on between characters, even though it's there at times. But this one is just really about the impermanence of memory and wanting to try and keep like a sense of love, even though they've been through so much. These two people have been through a lot, and they're trying to stay in the present, but the past keeps interfering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. It does feel like that, like this dance between the macro level tragedy of war and their own personal traumas that they've been through. So it's just a really like complex experience, though. I mean, I get this movie, but I'm also just like amazed that it was made. I'm amazed by the choices made throughout, and it does feel like poetry and classical music, and just I feel so much watching this movie that it's kind of overwhelming to experience.
It is definitely overwhelming. Yeah, but I almost feel like when I think about this movie, what I do think about is the opening sequence more so than the rest of it. I think there's just a lot happening in the opening sequence, and that shot that you talked about where they're entwined and just sort of glittering is just really encapsulates the whole experience of watching it to me. And I think, I don't know, there's something really strange going on there. And I feel like in the movie, they sort of come to encapsulate sort of their different nations. Like she kind of is like representing France and he's kind of representing Japan. And both of the like just traumas that both of those nations experienced. And the deep close-up on their bodies just makes me think sort of a map in a way, where you're just kind of like, I don't know. It's just very poetic, like you said, the whole thing.
Yeah. And just, the use of flashback or just intercuts here and there, it really does feel like how I would think. Well, I mean, certainly I've experienced a form of PTSD where it's like some things will remind you, like hands. Hands is a big thing in this movie. And just like she'll be seeing her lover's hands on the bed, and then suddenly she'll immediately think back to her German lover's hands. Like little things like that are just like, ooh, they cut so deep and they feel so real. And it's yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the best movies I've ever seen about that sort of interruption of memory. Like you can't fully be present because those things are so embedded into your psyche that they almost just like the past won't let you actually be in the present in the way. And I mean, she went through so much, he went through so much, and we're sort of experiencing it in a way that I think makes the most sense, even if it is kind of disjointed at times. I mean, that's certainly true of some of his other work, where the editing is so like elliptical and oftentimes random, to where you're almost put in the mindset of somebody who's struggling to remember or struggling to be in the moment.
Yeah, that's really true. I like that interpretation.
Yeah, and just like how they really are trying to heal and move on, and they can't, and I think, but at the same time, there's a feeling of hope that maybe their connection will somehow make things better or more manageable for the future. I don't know. How do you feel about the ending of this movie? Because on one hand, it's like there's that moment where they're sitting like separately at first in that cafe, and some other guy is hitting on her, and it's almost like he's sort of accepting that they need to move on, and they're not going to really have a full connection, and it's never going to be fully realized. And part of me is like, that's probably how it should end, but then they end up meeting in the room together again, and they both sort of like, I don't know, summarize who they are or their characters or what they've been through by just saying like, you are this, you are Hiroshima, you are Nevers. It's kind of like interesting to suddenly call them by their cities. Like that's what they're defined by in that final moment in a way.
Right.
Yeah. Well, how do you feel about the ending?
It is very puzzling. And just like in a lot of, oh my God, so many of his films end in a very puzzling way.
Yes.
I was just thinking of Wild Grass, which I just watched, which has the most puzzling ending, I think, of any of the ones that I've seen.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it just kind of speaks to sort of what I was saying earlier, that they're kind of like, and what you were saying, that they're both sort of locked in their own historical perspectives of their experience of this war, which is, I think, what this is really about, this film. And how I think a lot of the film is really them trying to like understand each other's experiences of the war when they're on these vastly different ends of it. And both of them are victims, and both of them are also perpetrators in some sense, these nations, I think, in a way that I don't think like the US can really think about in the same way. I don't think we were ever victimized in this way, in the way like those countries were, which is an interesting thing to watch this from the US perspective, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it just makes me think of like two lovers, two nations, just sort of like examining their wounds in a way, and like
coming to terms in a way.
Yeah, irreconcilable differences in perspective and experience, which is, I think, kind of what Resnais's films are all about. Yeah, but it is very puzzling, and it just sort of ends like a poem does, I think, where I don't necessarily know how to interpret it. But what did you think of it?
Well, that's the thing too. It's like, we were talking about, Anatomy of a Fall earlier, and just the ending notes that it kind of leaves you on is a feeling of ambiguity, and maybe both happened. Maybe, like here, it's a sense of they could end up together, or they could end up not together. And either way, I don't know if that's good or bad. Like, it's not one of those, it's certainly not a rom-com where you're like, I hope these two end up together. They're so perfect for one another. The film keeps telling me that they're perfect for one another. It doesn't have that sense of resolution. It doesn't have that sense of closure. And those are usually the types of, I've said this before too, but I'm kind of the opposite of my mom, in that my mom wants a sense of, this is how the story ends. This is how it ends. These two people end up together, or they don't. Here, we don't get that. And I kind of appreciate that. I can't say for sure if they're meant to be. It does just feel like a sense of they're finding peace within themselves, but they also have awareness that it's still like what they've been through. The trauma is still there. Mm-hmm. Really. And I think that the wild thing about a lot of his movies is that I almost feel like his films are like these narratives in search of themselves. I don't know how to, it's kind of a weird way to put it, but like it's in search of its own coherence or its own like meaning, but at the same time, like searching for the definitive meaning of what a movie means sometimes is kind of silly, because we all come at it from different places and different experiences. and it's like one of those magic eye paintings, or just a lot of these movies I feel like are difficult to just say it's definitely this or it's definitely that,
Yeah.
and I think that's what Resnais wants. It's the same thing that David Lynch, like, he'll never say, well, the cowboy in the Mulholland Drive represents this. Lynch is never going to do that, and I think he was definitely influenced by Resnais in that sense of.
Yeah, I was about to say I'm glad that you brought up David Lynch, because I think I thought of him a lot when I was watching these movies, and I tried to Google this. I was like, is David Lynch like a known Resnais fan? And I didn't find anything, but it seems clear to me. I don't know. Especially with, I think Providence reminded me a lot of Mulholland Drive, for one thing. Yeah, but we'll probably get there.
Yeah. No, but he was definitely influenced by surrealism and different things. Like, it could be poems and plays and writers and paintings. And he sort of consumed the arts in a lot of interesting ways, to where I think they just sort of fed into his subconscious whenever he, told a story, and had a lot of interesting collaborators. So, yeah, it's just really fascinating to me that initially a documentary that was just going to be about, the tragedy of Hiroshima suddenly became something completely different. Like, he even said it sort of just evolved without, like, him sitting down to plan it all out. And that's what this film sort of feels like. This relationship is ever changing and becoming something else right before our eyes. And I love the experience of going back to it, but it's, it's also, again, very similar to what I was saying about Night and Fog, just kind of harrowing, because you were seeing some imagery, or even just some of the protest scenes where they're walking out on the streets and stuff like that. It's still happening today in all different walks of life in all different countries. There's still intense and horrific conflict that may never get resolved. And I, experienced a documentary too from last year called Beyond Utopia, learning about what's going on in North Korea, that really, like, kind of shocked me in ways like that. Kind of made me also aware of the fact that, yeah, I'm politically ignorant to some degree, where I don't keep up with what's going on in the world as much as I should. But it's still like, I don't want to just say like, oh, I get all my, education from documentaries, but I'm just grateful that they exist sometimes, because I do get to learn a lot about what's happened. And certainly, even as early as in high school, I feel like they showed us this. I don't know if it was a made-for-TV movie about Hiroshima, where I think Pat Morita was even in it. But it was, I saw that in, I don't know if it might have even been like junior high or something, where they showed us a really devastating movie about the aftermath of what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Mm-hmm. And that all, oddly enough, ties into, what we just saw. I don't know did you catch up with Oppenheimer yet?
I did not yet.
Yeah. It's just interesting how this director is, and a couple of his works, like some of the things that he was interested in and tackled on that early on in his career as a, narrative storyteller or documentarian, are things that we're still thinking about to this day. The trauma, the aftermath, the things that have caused like a permanent wound on humanity. It's hard. It's really hard to go back to these movies sometimes, but at the same time, there's also just this like stunning portrayal of longing and desire in this movie too. So it's like they sort of, I don't want to say it balances out, but I almost feel like he is like trying to do that in some sense, where, there is the personal and public tragedy intertwining with this sense of real strong love and desire and connection. So it's like, There's good and bad in life.
I do think he does that so wonderfully, that bridging of like the personal and personal and political doesn't seem right, but just I guess honing in on the fact that global events happen because of individuals on some level, or just honing in on these personal connections on the backdrop of larger atrocities, and how individuals are connected to them and affected by them, I think is something I really love about Renee as well.
Yeah. I mean, also watching it this time too, though, I was a little struck that maybe the Japanese doctor is almost like probing the French actress in a way to like remember, remember and uncover your memories, of what's happened. Don't let go of them, and I'm not saying like he's like, oh, tell me about your tragedy or whatever over and over again, but it just seems like, I guess it is just them trying to understand where each of their lives have been and what they've been through. It's not like something that he's inflicting upon her necessarily. It's more just like, again, trying to come to terms, but also empathize with each other's experience because they've experienced it in different ways, I guess. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But there's still like just the sense of guilt and regret that I wonder if that's just always going to play a role, and they may not experience like this sustained sense of satisfaction even when they feel love because of what they've been through in the past. Let's just hope they can work through it. I don't know. I can't say for sure, and that's exactly what I love about the ending is it's not telling you either way. But it's a profound work of art without question. I mean, I also have a hard time just like picking an absolute favorite of his because certainly a short film that I'll just kind of like end on when we get to it. But I sent you that sort of last minute because I was like, well, it makes sense why I would love this so much.
I didn't get to watch it. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah. But I will.
It's hard to watch everything. That's for sure. Shall we move on? Ooh.
Yeah, let's move on.
Okay. Oh boy. Last Night at Marienbad. Wow. Another movie that I mean, the first time I saw it, I kind of went, I maybe it's just too smart for me. I don't know if I'm going to understand it entirely until like I sort of just gave in and let it wash over me and like experience it as, like I don't want to say like a fever dream, but just it does feel like a stream of consciousness dream where things are changing and not everything is making complete sense. Again, like really, really inspired and influenced by just surrealism and just making interesting choices throughout just because they feel right for the moment, even if they don't make narrative sense. But it's also, I mean, this is our introduction to his collaboration with someone else we know and we've talked about in the past, Delphine Seyrig, who plays a woman with the letter A. That's the other thing, too, about a lot of his films. We don't always get character names. But this is also based on... Well, I think it was originally going to be a play, but it was also like this writer, Alain Resnais. He's written a lot of interesting work in the past, and this was sort of like a collaboration between the two of them. And
I think he did some directorial things too. I think I saw one of his films and I didn't love it, but I respect what he's trying to do.
Well, he's a provocateur and certainly delves into sexuality and on a very cerebral level, but also just gets really, I don't want to say explicit. Maybe that's not the right term, but just, I don't know. It's hard to like sum up like what I've heard about his work outside of it being more intense and direct and often brutal. But that's the thing too, is like their collaboration here. It almost feels like Resnais brought more of a sense of, I don't want to say humanity, but just he toned it down because originally it was going to be a little bit more provocative. It was going to include a sexual assault until Resnais sort of stepped in and said, let's not include that. That is going to take people out of this experience. Because I think the writer's original intent was to have that in there. And a lot of people interpret that. And it's hard to like ultimately say what even I can sit down and say, this is exactly what this film is about. But I think it's just an experience. Like it's a movie where I just let it happen. And I try not to overthink or overanalyze it to death because I don't know if that almost feels like an exercise in futility to ultimately come up with this is exactly what this movie means. But I also find that to be a really incredible, invigorating experience when a movie doesn't spell everything out. But yeah, I don't know. I think this is one of the most incredibly well shot movies I've ever seen.
It's beautiful.
I'm kind of in awe of a lot of just whether the camera's moving or not. It's like feels like a work of art. It's like there's certainly that shot, of course, with all the people standing there casting those shadows out in the courtyard kind of area, and I just go, God, my God, who thinks up something like that? It's just remarkable. Like, there's that geometric garden, and everybody's like a tableau at times, and everybody's kind of just like standing completely still, and just it's like they freeze and they unfreeze in moments, and I couldn't tell you what it means or why it is that way. It's just kind of an enveloping film. And yet at the same time, it really is about two people again. It's about two people trying to figure themselves out and whether or not they've experienced something and what does it mean if they've met before or have they not met before at all. And who is the second man that keeps showing up but not really intervening in any way.
Who is that guy?
Yeah, what's his deal? He just loves to play that game. It's called Nim, which, of course, once this movie came out, everybody wanted to try and play themselves. And I don't know if that game is, I don't know if it's a metaphor for like, well, you're not going to be able to figure this movie out, so don't even try. But it's just a really disorienting movie that just happens to be really stunning to look at and just experience without necessarily trying to understand every little thing about it.
Yeah, I definitely feel like it's trying to put you in a trance and you should just kind of go with it or go with the flow. I loved rewatching this movie. I don't think I'd seen it in maybe a decade or so. And I don't really feel like I've learned anything since I watched it last. I was like, okay, this is equally puzzling and equally like strange. I do think to me, it does seem like there is a buried sexual assault in there. And to me, that's kind of like what a lot of it, it's hard for me to read it without that.
Sure.
Because I think that's part of what the two storylines or what the two characters and that third random character are trying to come into alignment on. Like, was there an assault? Was there not an assault? Did you want this? Did you not want this? And I actually don't think that anyone knows the answers to any of those questions.
No, we don't, and the characters don't.
Yeah, exactly. But I also, I think one of the notes I wrote down when I was watching this again is that it just made me think of like the concept of a memory palace.
Yes.
Which is like, just, the concept, or it's like a memorization concept where you store memories in different parts of like a structure, and it's like easier to retrieve them because you're imagining the structure they're in. And to me, just being sort of trapped in this mansion, and they're constantly talking about, there's like this repetitive voice that's like the thick carpets that absorb sound, like the decorations from a bygone era that just gets repeated over and over again. And I feel like I'm in a malfunctioning memory palace or something, like where the things you're remembering are kind of like lost all over the place, and like you've just become lost inside of it instead of it being a guiding structure in any way. But it's just, yeah, like I said, I think giving yourself over to this confusion, I think, is one of the beautiful things about this movie.
Let yourself be confused.
Yeah.
And don't get frustrated with it, because like even sometimes I do feel a sense of like, why am I not getting this? Why is my brain not computing what this all means? Because I think that's what we come to stories hoping for. Or we don't need that every time we watch a movie necessarily, or sit down and read a book like, oh, I have to understand what everything means. Sometimes I do feel like, oh no, what if I'm just intellectually inferior? Like this movie and like some French New Wave movies are just working on a level that I can't possibly comprehend, maybe because I am not of that time and place and culture, and that can happen with a lot of movies from other countries where it's just like there's a disconnect,
I also think that Renee just kind of like, I feel like he doesn't know what's going on either, and he kind of just leads with his gut, which I appreciate. I feel like I read an interview with him that says something like this, where he's just like, I don't know what the broad story is. Like, I just kind of like put it together, or like do it as I feel it. And I think that made me feel better to read. And I'm definitely paraphrasing. But that like, and I think that's part of why he relies on other writers, is that he's kind of like, I think his mind works in the way that like is reflected in these movies, like kind of moving all over the place. But I think that might be part of why he works with writers instead of writing his own stuff, is that he like appreciates a structure. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I like what you were saying about the memory palace. It does feel like a kind of like a materialization of just the process of trying to remember, and what happens when trauma informs that. Like, because, I mean, you can come at it from the perspective of the man. Maybe he's inflicted this trauma and he can't come to terms with what he's done, or he's trying to understand what happened and he can't entirely remember it. Or if we can come at it from the victim's perspective, what has she experienced and how come she can't remember it? And neither of them can come up with the correct recollection, because memory is fallible. Memory itself is just something that can't entirely be trusted.
Right. Yeah.
So, and this whole film sort of feels like that experience, but also just like the frustration of that, of just like, oh, I can't piece this together. And so you're a part of that experience as a viewer. Like, I can't piece together what they've been through because they can't piece together what they've been through. But yeah, I mean, it's, do you think the narrator is, I mean, that's the thing too, is like initially I always think it was like, well, it's an omniscient narrator coming in to describe what's taking place or this environment and everything. But I don't know, Sharon actually thought that it's possible that it is the main man, X, as he's known, Giorgio Albert Dazazzi. Like, he's kind of, this is like almost like his dreamscape or his memory palace trying to work through everything. Like, it's come mostly from his perspective.
Which is kind of how I read it. Yeah.
And I can definitely see that now, having watched it a couple of times, where it is mostly that experience. And less about trying to figure out, well, why are all those pictures there in the drawer again, and why did it, like, she get shot and now she's alive, and it's like, because we want to logically piece things together, but that's not this type of movie, you know. I mean, it is kind of an amazing experience because anybody can walk away with it with a different interpretation. Again, another movie about the fallacy of memory, and just like what happens when something may or may not have happened that keeps coming into play. And I read another interpretation that this is actually like an institution, and all these people are trying to help them work through their trauma in some way. And I guess M is like,
it's like Shutter Island.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was thinking too. Yeah. It's kind of an interesting idea. But I mean, it's clear that this movie's had like a huge influence on so many people, and you know, Kubrick, obviously.
Yeah, I feel like the stamp of this movie visually is all over the place, and that's what makes it such a special thing to watch.
Yeah.
The one I think of all the time is Melancholia. I feel like the first sequence with what is the actress's name?
Kirsten Dunst.
Why am I losing that name? Kirsten Dunst. Where she has sort of a dream sequence where she's walking through a garden. It just has always reminded me of the garden in this movie.
That's a good call. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and things like the statues keep moving, and you know, like you can't. It's hard to get a sense of geography because it does feel like a maze, you know, and. Yeah, there's again like a sense of them not fully coming to terms, but I don't know, like the very ending of them walking away together. I still don't know what to make of that. I still don't know what to make of the final sort of like resolution, if there is one. I don't know. But it's again like another examination of the ways in which we sort of attempt to narrate and figure out our memory, and just the feelings that come with that. But boy, I mean, there's certainly a sense of, there was some sort of assault, I think, because even early on in the film, there's like people gathered together, and one of them, you can overhear them saying, one night he tried to get inside of her room. And then of course, what happens later on, he tries to get inside her room, and we may not see exactly what happened, but it's sort of implied, I would say. I mean, that something really bad, at the very least, happened between the two of them. So yeah, I don't know. I love it. When it's over, I just kind of go, I love that experience, even though if I can't tell you what everything meant outside of just kind of being in awe of it on a technical level, where like some of the mirror shots, I don't know how they pull it off.
Oh yeah, I wanted to say, like, watching it this time around, it did remind me a lot of like Carnival of Horrors. Is that what it's called? Or
Carnival of Souls.
Carnival of Souls. Yeah, especially with the organ music, and just stark black and white. So like this time, a lot of it read horror to me in a way that I don't think it would have the last time that I watched it. And there's also this one sequence with Delphine Seyrig where she's like sort of in this exaggerated white makeup and laughing. That reminded me so much of Inland Empire, the one Laura Dern scene, that I was like, that was another one of the moments where I was like, Lynch loves this guy, or if like he doesn't, he should. You know.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That's a good callback. I mean, it is kind of, I mean, it creeps me out. It definitely has those moments of, I feel unnerved watching everything play out the way it does, but it's also just like, you could see the influence on so many different things. And, and also like the organ score comes courtesy of Delphine Seyrig's brother. Isn't that interesting?
Oh, no way. That's so great. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think he was kind of like like just like last minute sort of. Resnais was like, I need a composer that can do what I want, and because he was having trouble finding the right person to collaborate with, and kind of got lucky because that's a very memorable score. I mean, both Last Night and Hiroshima Mon Amour. I mean, those scores are, once you hear them, you don't forget them. They're just so distinctive, really interesting. Yeah, it's just I often feel like he's really like trying to jar you awake when he's watching a movie. Like, you can't be a passive viewer experiencing his work because he's like outright saying, hey, you got to follow this and you got to try and stick with it because it could potentially lead you to some great experience of a work of art. And both of those movies in particular, I would say, are strong examples of French New Wave at its best.
Mm-hmm.
Muriel is interesting too. Let's get to this because I almost feel like this whole episode we could just like edit it weird and just have like it jump all over the place and confuse people, but I wouldn't do that. But this is a movie that at times I wouldn't say confused me, but it's just the editing choices at certain moments were just kind of like so kaleidoscopic. And I later read that, like, oh, he basically just wanted to edit out 20 minutes of the movie that he didn't feel like was necessary to tell the entire story. And he just did it in this really kind of elliptical, kind of fast clip. And kept, like, certain moments of certain scenes within the movie, but they're not in their entirety, which is just kind of like an odd choice. Like, he's sort of abandoning the rules of conventional editing. And I don't know if it's just because that's where he started out, is just like, you know, throwing the rule book of what's expected when you tell a story anyway. But yeah, I mean, the whole film isn't like that, obviously. It's not entirely like this challenging feeling of chronological dislocation, but, you know, we're kind of in the mindset, again, of characters who are struggling with something that happened in the past. So once again, we have Delphine Seyrig collaborating as Helene, who lives in an apartment which doubles as an antique store, which I'm like, that's cool. Mm-hmm. I love the setup. I love the setting quite a bit. And what happens? She's visited by a lover from her distant past, and that particular lover arrives with his quote-unquote niece, who is actually not his niece. So yeah, like identity in flux and things kind of being subverted throughout this movie. But also we have her son who's gone through some sort of tragic trauma as a result of being in the war. And yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of character dynamics and interesting interactions throughout. We do have less of his sort of tendency to, have like these abstract visuals, or it's almost like the kind of the opposite of Last Year at Marion Bad, where he does try to tell more or less a straightforward story, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think that's true. I do feel like there's a shift here towards or away from like the super puzzles and towards a more like concrete narrative. But there's still a lot of puzzling stuff, and there still is a lot of like time stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't know that he doesn't he never does flashbacks, or like I don't think he ever really does, but I also really love the antique shop as a setting, and I think if I remember correctly, he does do a lot of time. He takes a lot of time like showing us that setting and like showing us like the clocks and like all these other artifacts that are like they use them in their household. Like they don't own them because they could be sold at any moment, but like they use them day to day, which I think is really interesting. So they're just sort of in this like timeless zone. But they're also like they're dealing with a lot of different histories. I think the city they're in, I can't remember the name of it, but it was like it was a site of a lot of like conflict during the war. And then, which I think they talk about a lot, like as in like it was bombed out or something. So they're sort of dealing with like the repercussions of that. And then the son, like his trauma is from the Algerian War or from like atrocities that he participated in that war. So there's just kind of like a lot, I don't know, a lot of tragedies kind of refracting off of each other in a way that I think is really interesting, and that is like sort of underlined by this antique store where everything is from a different era and they don't really know where to ground themselves in time. I really like this one. I like them all, but I think I have a special place in my heart for Muriel. And Jatem, which we'll get to, but
I don't know. I wouldn't, like, again, I'm going to watch it again at some point in the future for sure. I think it was, I didn't get as emotionally invested, or like kind of, I guess that's where I often come to with a lot of films that I don't immediately connect to, is like, I want to experience, some sort of compassion or empathy for the characters involved. And it's not that I just didn't feel, and I wouldn't say it like left me emotionally cold, but I didn't necessarily get as involved with the relationships or feel a sense of the kind of longing you get in the other films.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. There's some distance in it.
Yeah.
And I think, to me, maybe it is a lot more about settings for this one. To me, like in the house and then walking around the neighborhood, like in the city that they're in. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does feel it does feel a lot more distant and more, it does have a puzzly aspect though, where like it takes a while to get, it takes a while to get to the knowledge that the son has done this thing to Muriel. And I think it's interesting. It's really interesting always to me that the film is called Muriel, like really centering that buried thing that's at the heart of this movie, that really, you see like documents about her throughout. But like you really, and you hear like a voice of her talking about it, but like she's really not, I don't know. Yeah, she is like a very buried thing. So it's like this very evasive narrative where all these other things are happening. But then what the movie is, I don't know, seems to actually be about is this buried story of Muriel. And that's, I feel like I need to watch it again to sort of like pick that out.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, my assumption before even starting it was that, Delphine Seyrig was going to play Muriel.
Right. And I feel like even I've watched this before and somehow that didn't stick with me. I was like, oh yeah, Delphine Seyrig, she's Muriel. And then I was like, wait, that's not what's happening at all. Yeah.
He gets playful like that. Like he kind of sets things up a certain way and then says, nope, that's not how it's going to go this time. And then he does a lot of the like sort of fast close-ups of objects and body parts into dialogue scenes and repeats certain footage and jumps around in time and interrupts musical interludes just as they begin, which I always kind of like in movies where it just feels like, whoa, why'd you stop there? Like just that. I mean, again, it's like he's trying to shake us up a little bit, like shake us up and kind of make us more aware of what he's doing as a storyteller. That I guess can bug some people. Like it could take you out of the actual story without being like kind of immersed in what's taking place. But I always find like those kind of audacious choices to be interesting in of themselves, to where I don't know. Like sometimes I don't get why you make that choice or why he does what he does, but I just find the choice in of itself interesting. Including just like, yeah, Muriel's almost like just this kind of apparition haunting all the characters, whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah, and I mean, there's the incident, you know, a torture of that the son was involved with, and again, not necessarily has a clear indication of how things are gonna resolve themselves, either with the previous relationship that Helene had. But they also have, very similar to other movies, kind of different interpretations of their own previous relationship together. It's kind of interesting how, once again, remembrance is very flawed in the way they communicate to each other and have different feelings and ideas of what's happened. But I don't know. I thought that, the final moment was, again, more of a question mark, where I forgot, I think it's Simone comes to the empty apartment and she's searching for him, and he's not there, and the camera sort of follows her through the rooms until she realizes that nobody's home. And yeah, I guess, the camera just sort of stops and maybe suggests like this new stories will take place in this particular space. And, we don't know what they will be, and we don't know if it'll be good or bad. It's just people will continue to be flawed and imperfect and make mistakes and not necessarily, come to terms or learn from the past. I mean, that's just kind of how I thought of how things are in the end. But I don't know, it is kind of a puzzle in exactly what it's trying to say thematically.
Yeah.
But that's not a bad thing. I mean, I welcome that more than like something being spoon-fed again. Like I'd rather, it gives me a reason to go back at some point in the future, as long as I find the experience of watching it pleasurable, which for the most part I did. I guess I was just a little bit more surprised that I didn't get a sense of really strong attachment to what the characters have been through. I just kind of another experience of letting the film just happen.
Mm-hmm. I feel like with a lot of his movies, I enjoyed like looking back on them almost more than I enjoyed like the process of watching them, which is interesting. I'm just like, I feel like they creep on you in this way, where like you start to think about them afterward. I feel like Wild Grass especially has been like that.
It's kind of funny because we talked a lot about memory, and our memories of the movie is probably not entirely accurate, because you can't, again, you're watching something. It's not every little thing is going to retain or stick with you. It's only like certain things, or as, I've often said, like, I don't necessarily retain plots or the actual story, but how a movie made me feel, like, I think that's kind of the joy of going back to certain movies, is like, I'm probably going to feel something, even if it's a bad movie. Like, I'll feel frustration. Like, it's automatically, it's guaranteed you're going to have an emotional response of some kind, even if it's indifference. I mean, that's still possible. But I don't know. I just kind of love the experience of trying to think back to certain moments or feelings that I get from his work. You're right. I like just, they may not necessarily be instant pleasure when you're watching them, but when you think about them or you process them more later on, that's kind of the joy.
Yeah. As an aside, I feel like Saltburn was like the exact opposite of that. where it like gives you nothing afterward, but it keeps your interest the whole way through, but then gives you like nothing to like really ruminate on afterward. But that's just an aside.
Well, that movie kind of made me angry in that I was just like, that was just like Talented Mr. Ripley, wasn't it? It was just like, I don't know if I really got a whole lot out of that movie.
I absolutely didn't. but it my compliment of it was that it kept my interest the whole way through. But then at the end, I was just kind of like, all right, like.
Yeah, some movies are just empty experiences, but like, I mean, I'm not saying like that's bad either. Like, if you're compelled and you're interested while you're watching it, that's a good thing. Like being disengaged as you're watching something is really bad.
Yeah.
But
It's still a win. It's still a positive thing.
yeah, so Je t'aime. When I first saw this one, I went, "Oh my god. I think Michel Gondry stole this movie." No, not.
No, totally. I was thinking that same thing. I mean, he obviously did something very different, but like
Oh, of
there are
course.
definitely, yeah, a lot of inspiration here.
And also, I think of it as like, what if Resnais were to make his own adaptation of Slaughterhouse-Five? Only instead of like focusing on the trauma of what writer Kurt Vonnegut went through during the war, this time it's more about the struggles of being in a long-term relationship that dissolves. Like that again. As much as his interest in identity and memory is imbued throughout, I think, most of his work, here he's also concerned with just time, the passing of time, and the fact that we're all stuck inside of it. I mean, that's why we all have daily planners and clocks and Google calendars. We're slaves. We had to decide what time we're going to talk for the podcast, right? So I think that's certainly a component of what he's tackled in some of his short films, and it almost feels like it's inevitable for him to do a time travel kind of a movie, but this is more or less like science fiction, and like an out pretty much all out kind of genre for him exercise, like a genre exercise for him. Which really surprised me, and really, I kind of love this movie, almost as much as his first two. Really, I guess a lot of that is just because I like time travel movies, but it does feel personal to the point of it, like this character that we're following, he's not able to live with what he's done, and certainly not being in love anymore or feeling love anymore. It's just this non-linear impressionism that sort of flips back and forth and onto itself that I just really like experiencing, even if it's jarring or at times like caught in a loop, like he keeps ending up in that ocean, trying to like come up from the water. Like that image just keeps popping up throughout. I guess it was sort of a collaboration again with an interesting writer, Jacques Sternberg, and basically him and Resnais like fashioned this script out of 800 pages of writing that Sternberg sort of like compiled over time, like as these short fragmented scenes, and some of it was like autobiographical, which is really wild. And, I think that's also what Gondry actually asked of Kate Winslet and Jim Carrey to do too, is to incorporate like a couple of real life experiences into the film, which was, almost like therapeutic for them, but also very difficult. Yeah. So like you get a little glimpses of him being out of time and displaced and dislocated and jumping back and forth, but it's not like he has the awareness that he's time traveling. It's not like it stops and he goes, "Oh, wait a minute. We're basically like just living inside the memory and watching him play it out," as opposed to like other time travel movies where the character obviously knows that he's unstuck in time. So it's a very different kind of time travel movie in that way, in a way that I think Resnais does quite successfully. And of course, you gotta love a movie. I'd be remiss in not bringing up the fact that Catrine's proposal that mankind was created in order to take care of cats.
I was going to bring that up too. That's such a special anecdote.
That's when I went, oh boy, yeah, he kind of made this movie for me, didn't he? No, but no, I love this movie, and I'm assuming you do as well.
Yeah, I do. I loved a lot of the same things, like obviously the monologue about the cats and how people were created to serve them. That was the gist of it, right?
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, also the sequence that you brought up where he's wading through the water.
Yeah.
I think it's just like that recurrent image is just like really beautiful. And like just sort of represents like this like being outside of time to me, because like of the way he's moving against the current and the way the shot captures that, the way he's moving against the current, it just seems like he's sort of like floating, and I just like really love that recurrent shot. But I also, yeah, I just like thought of Eternal Sunshine so much when I was watching it, especially in the scenes where his dreams start to mesh with the memory. I think he talks about this dream he has of like a woman in a bathtub, I think it is.
Oh yeah, and like an office desk. Yeah.
And at a certain point, like we actually see that happening. And then like at certain points, I think he even starts to talk to his girlfriend or wife about things that he sees that like weren't in the memory. And the mice that he's like that are from the research lab, he sees every once in a while.
Yeah, he sees the mouse on the beach at one point and actually calls it out. It's like, hey, there's a mouse here. That's weird.
Yeah. Oh, that was what I was thinking of. Yeah, he's with his girlfriend on like the beach on a blanket, and he's like, "Oh, there's a mouse," and she's like, "What?" Yeah, I think philosophically, I really like everything about this movie, and it really made me start thinking about just sort of Resnais's whole filmography and how he really thinks about cinema. I was like writing down notes. I was like, oh, like he think like cinema is time travel. I was like, no wait, like memory is time travel. No wait, like editing is time travel. And like I think like that's true in this movie, like all of those things. That he really thinks. This is when it became clear to me, even though I think he does this in all of his movies, that like he really thinks of the cinematic apparatus and the brain very like analogously. Is that the word? He just, I think, recognizes the way that cinema has changed the human memory in a way, in that like I think if you've seen a lot of movies. Oh, my cat just hopped up here.
Well, you know, he's a big fan of this movie for obvious reasons.
But I think in terms of like an art that is closest to the way that the human mind works, I definitely think Resnais was like, well, that's cinema. And so let's see like what we can do with this comparison. And I feel like that's what this movie is really about. And I appreciate that a lot. It just like not like outside of plot and everything, of which it's like pretty slim. I just felt like in a lot of ways I was like, oh, this is the clearest articulation I think in a movie of how like the mind works, or at least how my mind works, or like when I'm daydreaming or dreaming. I just think it's a really interesting document of just like psychology in a way that like I really love. And I mean, it's an experience like all of his movies, but it also just like really makes you think. And I think when I say Resnais's movies are like a puzzle, I think they really activate you in that way, where you can't just totally be passive. You have to be kind of constructing. And I don't know if that's always constructive or not, but
yeah, you have to be an active participant in the experience, and just sort of, I mean, subjectivity is also something I think he's fascinated by, and just like how it's kind of overwhelming. You know, there's pleasures and there's dangers that come with just the personal experience and what you bring to a movie or to another person. I mean, I think that's also what this movie is about, is like bringing yourself into the life of another person, and how it's often contradictory, or how it's often paradoxical, or just like, I feel this way, you don't feel this way, but let's try and make it work. And sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes people can get past their differences and work through them, and sometimes they can't. And that's, I mean, again, like, I love movies about relationships, whether they succeed or not, and just, whether you can look at something like the Before trilogy and how that movie talks a lot about, I mean, Richard Linklater is another filmmaker that is fascinated by time and what it does to the human mind and our expectations to, like, what happens over time, and you're right. And like, thinking about editing is almost like time travel, and figuring out ways to tell a story that, makes sense. But I think this is more about emotionally making sense too. I mean, a lot of people just kind of go, well, that was a cerebral experience, the end. But I don't know. I do feel, I mean, he's not always, this guy is not easy to sympathize with at times. He often finds her sort of like neediness and vulnerability a little bit confining. And that's, he can be a dick, but I mean, like, a lot of people can be too. Like, a lot of people have these selfish moments, but, ultimately he can't change anything. And this is also a movie where it's clear that there isn't a clear sense of closure at the very end. I mean, I guess one could like say that, like, oh, he's dead, but I don't think so, right? Like, he's like, that's the thing too. It jumps around, and I kind of get a little confused by what exactly happens at the end outside of my own interpretation of, like, well, the very last shot is the mouse trapped inside there, so that's basically him. He's still trapped inside time. Like, there's no coming back, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the sense I get, yeah.
Yeah. Because, like, it's a perpetual state. Like, it's basically like an experiment that didn't work, and it's unfortunate for him, but I don't know. This is a really interesting movie, and you put it in a very interesting context of it being about something more than just like a failed relationship that, he gets to relive and try to figure out in some way. Because even some people say, like, oh, the very ending of Eternal Sunshine just means, like, it's not like hopeful necessarily. Like, they're going to keep repeating the same mistakes. That's why there's that shot of them kind of like in a loop at the very end of the movie. So it's like saying, like, yeah, they're together and they're going to keep trying, but they're going to keep messing up because they're imperfect humans, and yeah, I often find it interesting when I think of what filmmakers are trying to say about their process or filmmaking within a movie, because I mean, I know it's certainly come up way before something like when I saw Inception, but when I saw Inception, when I walked out of that movie, I was like, that was a pretty great film about Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker, and a lot of people have said that since, but I honestly really felt that way about it when I saw it, and it made it for a more interesting experience too, than just being like, oh, it's an escapist action movie about dreams and point A to point B to point C. But I really do think he was, like, whether consciously or not, telling a story about his process, which made it interesting. And you're sort of saying that about Renee and in this film.
Yeah, I think I am sort of saying that.
Yeah, no, I really like that too, because it adds a whole other layer. So why don't you talk a little bit about provenance, because you had a really interesting correlation. That, I mean, I thought of something too, but this was an interesting, like, movie to track down. And the only reason why I wanted to was like, oh, it's his only English language film. And the cast, I was just like, I gotta find this, and it hasn't gotten like a proper Blu-ray release, but I'm hoping that changes, because it really needs to be seen and restored. And even my experience of watching it, I thought like, well, if this was even higher quality, I might have even liked it even more. But tell me about your experience with this, because I don't think you'd seen it before either, right?
Nope, this is the first time I'd seen that one. And I was excited to watch it because I like really love Elaine Stritch. But it also had Ellen Barkin, who's fun.
Ellen Burstyn. Ellen Barkin, I think, is, yeah.
My bad.
That's okay. Yeah. It happens.
Similar name, very different actress. Yeah. But I think it was interesting. I feel like all their performances were very subdued.
Yeah.
In a way that like, I was like, what? I was kind of confused about that. So the performances like weren't exciting to me, but the content of the movie really was. I really liked the idea of this this writer just sort of using the people closest to him in his life as like playthings in like a narrative that sort of just like dealt with his feelings about all of them in various ways, but didn't utilize them in ways that were like actually accurate to who they were in real life. So my perception of this movie and why I compared it to Mulholland Drive is that I feel like the first like 2/3 of it are him just kind of going wild in his imagination. And the last third is sort of more closest, but not entirely like his actual reality, where all of these people just come to visit him on his birthday and have like a pretty normal time. And up until then, it's a lot of weird things with there are men, like hairy men creeping in the woods getting shot. And like,
oh, right.
Yeah. And people running around with guns and shooting people. Very dramatic. And he'll just sort of like switch people out very suddenly. He'll be like, oh, what happens if this character's in here instead? Which is just very, very real to like the creative process, I think, if you're writing. And so I really enjoyed that. And I just really enjoy anything that's sort of about art, which I felt like this movie was just sort of about narrative making.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed the way he talked about that. And it was very dreamy. And yeah, I felt like I saw a lot of David Lynch in there. But especially with the way that the first part is very strange and playful, and the second part is like kind of more realistic, maybe. But yeah, that was how I felt about it.
Yeah. Returning again to preoccupations of perspective.
Yeah.
And just like, see, sometimes I agree, and have said this before too, but, you know, in the film adaptation, Brian Cox plays Robert McKee and says, don't use voiceover narration. It's such a crutch, you know? And sometimes like that's something that Resnais does throughout a lot of his work. And it doesn't really bother me.
No, I like it because it, I just feel like it calls attention to sort of like, it's just another voice in this like plurality of voices that are sort of sometimes like contrasting with what we're actually seeing. So I kind of like it when he uses the voiceover. Yeah.
Yeah. And here I think it serves a valuable purpose for us to get inside the writer's head and his creative process. And yeah, it makes it more sense. I mean, it feels a little bit more traditional and not as visually ambitious, which is kind of what surprised me the most, to where I was
that is true.
I was kind of like, it reminded me a little bit of The Singing Detective, the Dennis Potter miniseries, to where I thought, oh, this
right. It does have sort of a made-for-TV kind of visual look.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I was like, I don't know if I would get a different feeling or experience seeing this like restored or something, because it's not Last Year at Marienbad or another like film that's more playful with its visual palette, I guess you could say. But I mean, it's interesting, and I certainly was engaged by it. I certainly thought, like, just the concept of watching, this aging writer lying in bed trying to work through, the story, and like his perspectives of his own family are very different than what we get when we finally see them towards the end. It's kind of like, it's weird that like in his head, like there's all this tension and conflict and questions about everyone's relationship, and you're right in saying like a lot of the acting here is far more subdued than I would expect. Like again,
Yeah, I guess it was like, if you're gonna have Elaine Stritch, like really use her, but
yeah, or Dirk Bogarde from.
Oh yeah, actually he does pretty well though. He's pretty flamboyant.
Yeah, no, he's very good, and it's kind of interesting because I forgot which like special feature I was watching that said that this Joseph Losey movie with Dirk Bogarde called Accident is hugely inspired by Resnais. So now I'm like, oh great, I gotta add that to my watch list because I love Dirk Bogarde in now I just drew a blank. Oh, The Servant. The Servant is one of my favorite movies, and Joseph Losey did that. So anyway, it all sort of ties together, and it's great casting. But yeah, I was expecting a little bit more from Ellen Burstyn, to be honest.
Yeah,
and it's not to say
like
she's
he
bad.
told them to be more French or something, and they were just like,
yeah, no, but it's like it's one of those movies where again, like I wasn't like fully like awestruck or intoxicated by it, but I found it really interesting just to watch and experience, and sort of the big surprise sort of comes at the end when it's like the real world scenes are actually kind of sunny and idyllic and pleasant.
mm-hmm.
It's again like subverting my expectations. It's another inversion of like, turns out that things aren't as dark and conflicting as we were led to believe. But that's because he's creating this alternate world, this alternate storyline for all of these people that have been in his life for so long. And I imagine that's very true of a lot of storytellers, that they take, bits and pieces from their own personal lives and put them into the actual art that they're creating. And maybe a lesser version, although, I mean, again, like I'm conflicted about bringing his name up, but I couldn't help but think a little bit about Woody Allen's Deconstructing Harry a little bit too, because in that film he basically does the same thing and just like takes people from his own life literally just to create stories, and people get mad at him for doing that. And I always found that movie to be an interesting insight into the creative process. But it's Woody Allen. He's self-indulgent and blah, 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 and we don't need to talk about him anymore. But like Renee's version of something like that, where he creates this contrast between the fictional and real world sort of counterparts, is just really kind of a fun, like, less heavy experience than what I'm used to from him. And it's, I don't know. I wouldn't say it's like upper tier, like must see Resnais, but I think it's worth tracking down and trying to find, and hopefully somebody somewhere will restore it and maybe give it new life in the future.
Yeah.
But it's, I liked it. I definitely liked it. And maybe I was primed or expecting a little bit more based on, but I could see, like, again, the influence on things I love, like even Charlie Kaufman,
Yeah.
Again, but so you had an early experience with Wild Grass. You wrote a review on your wonderful blog that you used to have.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the review, and revisiting it, what did you think of Wild Grass? I'm conflicted myself.
Yeah, it's what a strange movie it is. It's so strange. I don't know. I think I haven't seen maybe enough of Renee's later movies to actually say this for sure, but I feel like at a certain point he sort of turned away from like these super political films and just started making films about like well, what is even this one about?
That's what I was
About,
thinking.
yeah, that are just more playful. But then that doesn't seem right either, because this one also has like, I did not remember this from the first time I watched it, but like the main character, well, there's two. Maybe I should summarize it first for anyone who hasn't seen it, but it's just kind of like this woman played by Sabina Azima, who I think was married to Resnais at one point,
Mm-hmm.
or I think they were married, or they just worked together a lot. But I think they were married.
I think they were too.
Yeah. So she like loses her wallet, and this other guy finds it, and based on finding it, he like picks through it and kind of constructs this like elaborate. He constructs an idea of who she is based on this wallet, and like sort of falls in love with that idea. And then like very aggressively pursues her. And then at first she's put off by this, but then I think something about that pursuit intrigues her a lot, and she becomes more like open to it. But yeah, I guess I was saying that like Hiroshima is a romantic movie. I think this is a pretty romantic movie in its way, although it's very strange. And there's like just lots of like little details in it that like kind of come up and then disappear, which I think is fascinating. Like where the Georges, I think is the guy's name, who finds the wallet. He has like an internal monologue that you hear, and he says some stuff that leads you to believe that he's like actually a criminal in hiding, or that he like has like he's like murdered people potentially, or done really violent things. But this like comes up for like a brief moment and disappears, and you never hear about it again, which I think is like kind of amazing, because it really makes you wonder about what's going on with this relationship. But like, I don't know, there's still like a strong eroticism between the two protagonists, I think, that I respond to a lot.
Sure.
And it's very strange. I don't know. I recommend seeing it for anyone who hasn't. It's like one of his last movies. And I needed to talk about this, that his last 4 films, I think, were scored by Mark Snow, because it turns out that Resnais was an X-Files fan, which I love. And I think that's like really important to know. But yeah, that also makes the mood of this film very strange, that it's scored by Mark Snow. So it's very supernatural seeming to me, because I'm so kind of like entrenched in the X-Files as a cultural phenomenon. Yeah. I'm curious about your thoughts about it. Was this your first time seeing it, or had you seen it before?
Yeah, it was my first time seeing it. And speaking of Mark Snow, I was remiss in not bringing up that Christophe Penderecki did the score for Je t'aime, Je t'aime, and that's a really great score and an incredible composer. But yeah, and also I'd be remiss in not mentioning the fact there's a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but like 7 or 8 movies in between Providence and Wild Grass that I either didn't see because I didn't hear good things, or they were just hard to find. But at some point, yeah, I would be curious to track more of his work down. But the ones I kind of handpicked here felt like, I would say, the more essential ones that at least stood out, or at least I read were like, oh, these are interesting, you should check them out. Not to say that the other ones aren't, but you're absolutely right in that it's almost like he lightened up with age. And like got more playful and embraced like a dark comedic side, as opposed to like just, I mean, Je t'aime isn't necessarily like so bleak, but his early work definitely is, for good reason, because that's the point in time and what the stories he was trying to tell. But with something like Wild Grass, I was a little perplexed in what was happening, where things were going, why people were doing what they were doing. And that's often happened in like Godard films, where I'm just like, why did they make that choice? Okay, why is this happening? Again, it could just be an experience of like, I just have to go with this and not question, like, why is this character doing this, or why is suddenly, he is being, like, thought of or get privy to the fact that he might be a murderer, and that doesn't fall in line with everything else that came before it. But I didn't follow every plot point, but I also think that's beside the point of a lot of his work. This is kind of his take on like a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode, because he was a big fan of Larry David, believe it or not. Like,
oh, that doesn't surprise me. That's fun.
yeah, I know. It's just kind of unexpected, to say the least, when I sat down to watch this, where, like, even just the slow motion of the purse, I was like, oh, that's kind of whimsical. Like, I mean, just like little things throughout this movie, I thought, well, that was an interesting decision, or the stuck zipper, or
Oh my god.
I mean, I guess I just most of the time I'm watching this with a question mark over my head, but that wasn't I wasn't unengaged by it, or I wasn't like not enjoying it. I just kind of went, I don't know how I feel about this. It's like sometimes he treats movies like jazz, where I don't know if he knows exactly where it's going to end up, or the right key that it's in, or something. Like, it's just kind of moving as it like he sort of finds the movie as it goes on, and we're just expected to go with it, even if we can't necessarily find a central thesis or a theme that we're supposed to hold on to. I did feel like it was a little meandering, and again, hard to make sense of character intentions. But I also have to admit, like, you mentioned the very end of this movie, where I was like, why did you end that way? But I loved it anyway, where we just have that random farmer's daughter who we see for the first time, and just asking, Mommy, when I'm a cat, will I be able to eat cat munchies? I'm like, what? That's the final shot. That's the final line of this movie. I mean, it's kind of like nonsensical, but I don't know. Like, sometimes intentional weirdness that feels disjointed, it can be still fun and interesting. And even if I don't know what the purpose of this story ultimately is, I mean, you do bring up the fact that there is like a sense of longing and desire between the two people here, even if it's not necessarily fully realized. I just think that's there. Like, there's a sense of romance, even if it's kind of like an awkward one. So that's there for sure. But like, there's also just at times the 20th Century Fox fanfare shows up. Like, I don't know if he's making a commentary about, just romantic comedies in cinema or something. Like just like at one point, like, I think they might even be like embracing, and then suddenly we hear the 20th Century Fox theme out of nowhere, and I'm kind of like, what? Okay, that's kind of fun and playful and weird and interesting.
I didn't miss that, but that's really funny.
Yeah, it is strange. I don't know, because it's like a stalker movie too. I don't know what to make of it. I'll watch it again at some point, but I don't know if I fully got it.
Right. And then there's a whole like title, which every once in a while there's like these panning shots of like manicured lawns, and then other panning shots of like, I think it's the grass that's growing on the runway that she flies her plane from.
Right.
And I don't really quite know like exactly what he was trying to say with the wild versus manicured grass. Yeah, it's a very puzzling movie. And the last scene that you were talking about, I don't know, it's almost like he's joking somehow about how you're probably going to be watching this like on YouTube, and something weird is going to pop up right after it that like completely changes the context of it. I don't know. Like, that's just what I was thinking right now. I was like, that just seems like something that would pop up if you were watching YouTube. Like, I don't know, just like really random and completely disjointed from the other video you were watching. But I have no idea. It's so curious, and I still don't really know what to make of it. And I also don't know what to make of, like, right before then, let's say, the two people who have been chasing each other this whole movie end up in a plane together because she's a pilot.
Yeah.
Right. And this is part of what he is drawn to in her, because he sees her pilot license in her wallet. And I think he's like an aficionado of old planes. So they have a connection in that way. But he lets her drive, or no, she lets him drive the plane once they're up there, but his fly is down. And this causes like havoc for them in the sky. They're just like flying all over the place. And then it's unclear whether they survive that.
Yeah. Which is a total Curb Your Enthusiasm kind of scenario, like of that happening and it being really weird and like it's confusing and kind of funny, but I also go, all right. I mean, this is just kind of his version of a, romantic comedy, I guess, in a way. But
yeah, I mean, there's like kind of a screwball energy to it. Like instead of instead of the train going through the tunnel, you get the plane doing loop-de-loops in the sky. But what's that supposed to mean? It's funny.
I don't know. Another enigma that maybe at some point in the future I'll revisit and be like, oh yeah, I kind of get it now. Or it's just supposed to be, fun and, you don't have to necessarily have deep thoughts about it or something. It's just an experience. And he's really good at crafting unique ones for sure. And his penultimate work was a film that I thought I'd seen it. It's funny because like this is around the time where I'm trying to keep up with all the awards contenders or things that are making top 10 lists of that year. And I remember seeing it pop up. I think even on Mike D'Angelo's list, who's a critic I follow and really enjoy. But I guess I'd never seen it before. It was like I had like one of those weird moments of watching it. I was like, have I seen this before? I don't think I've seen this before.
Wait, I had the same experience. That's so strange.
Yeah, it is weird.
Yeah, because I was like, have I seen this before? And I really can't remember if I have. I still don't know. But it's funny that you felt that way too.
Yeah, and it's funny because memory, again, showing up in the work of Resnais, like as we're talking about it, like, yeah, interesting. I don't know if like it just ultimately becomes this meta experience with his work, but this is, his penultimate work, and it does feel like kind of an interesting summation in playing, with art and artifice, and certainly the French actors that show up in this film he's worked with throughout a lot of his career. And man, this setup, I just couldn't help but think of Clue, because like they're all receiving
Clue. Yeah.
They're receiving a phone call requesting they come to this mysterious place and they'll all receive something maybe, or I don't know, like it's just the way it's set up. I was like, oh, this is kind of a really fun way to kick things off. And, it's sort of a who's who in terms of, names that are there and actors that have been a part of his work throughout the years. And again, it does have like some sort of meta layers going on, but yeah, so it's, basically about a guy is, he's going to pass away and he wants everybody that he's worked with in the past to come in to this screening that he's holding of a play that he's filmed of a bunch of young actors performing. And it's again, like with Resnais, it does sort of harken back to probably his earliest experiences working in theater or having an avid interest in theater. And then during the actual screening taking place, everybody watching this film, watching the film on the screen, gosh, this sounds like I'm confusing myself at this point, but they're all sort of overwhelmed by what they're seeing, that they start to perform it together in the space that they're in. If that all makes sense, hopefully, but everything becomes interwoven, the play, the film, the actors, the scene, the scenery, suddenly it's like on a big sound stage, and layers of performance and memory topple over one another. And yeah, I think it's really like a fun, interesting exercise that I don't know if I would call it essential Resnais, but it's just, I kind of enjoyed the experience of watching all these actors get excited about performing again. You know, I think that's kind of the joy of this movie. In a way, it's like Resnais's take on Vanya on 42nd Street, the Louis Malle film. So it's, you know, like for those who love theater and French cinema, this is almost like a beautiful marriage in a really interesting way that I found mostly just kind of a fun experience, even if it's not like deep or profound in the way like his early work is. I almost feel like he just got kind of got lighter and I don't want to say less intellectual as he got older, but just like this is kind of more of him embracing what he loves about storytelling and the many layers and different things that can take place.
Yeah, I think his interest in performance is like a thing that is it's there in all of his work, but this one felt like the most like of all the one I'd seen just kind of like about performance. And it was thought-provoking. I also thought I was like, I didn't need as much of it as there was. I was like, this could have been a little shorter. And I think
I agree with that. Yeah, totally. It didn't
as much out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I did appreciate it a lot. I appreciated that like he had in one movie like 3 different people playing each part. There were like the people playing it on the screen that they're watching, and then like 2 different actors playing each part who are watching it. And it just kind of flowed between all of them. And it did make me think a lot about like what a character is and like how a character becomes real through different means, like whether you're reading it or saying it out loud, and just like the different qualities that all the performers brought to that character. And it was like, I think it was good that, I don't know if it was, is this a real play? I know it's based on the Greek myth, but I don't know if the play itself.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Real. It's a good question.
But I think I appreciated that it was based on a Greek myth that's pretty well known, so that you don't have to like reach too much to like understand what they're talking about. And it's like, it's a really interesting myth, and like it shows up in Portrait of a Lady on Fire too, I think, and is interpreted in a very different way, which I think is cool.
Yeah.
So I like that he utilized that myth. And yeah, like I said, I feel like I didn't need as much of it as there was, but I really appreciated like the thought space it put me in and how it made me think about theater and acting and performance in general. And just how like, I think when he hones in on performance, he's just very interested on not just in like artistic performance, but using that as a way to analyze how people perform in everyday life, which I think is very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I've never seen anything quite like it. I have to say that.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of felt like this is really unique and unlike any portrayal of, I mean, outside of Vanya on 42nd Street is basically just the same actors, but they basically been rehearsing this same play for a long time, and suddenly the rehearsal becomes what we're seeing being filmed right before our eyes, and the whole play just is basically played out in a really interesting way. Like, I think there is a break in reality. like that's kind of like that to me is like, that is the movie about theater and performance that really, I mean, sticks with me to this day. Probably because I saw it at an impressionable time, like maybe late 90s or something, where I was just starting to understand a lot more about film and filmmaking. And then I saw that and I was like, oh, this really makes me think more about acting and performance and just what it takes and how people get completely lost in their characters in some ways. And here it's like a celebration of that process. And it's clear that Resnais has respect for the actor and what it all means and what it, like and certainly just the fact that a lot of these people are not, the appropriate age, I guess you would say, for the roles that.
Yeah, that's actually something I wanted to talk about, or like I was thinking about
Yeah.
watching all of his movies. Is that like, I don't know. I mean, this isn't necessarily what you were thinking, but I was just really impressed by the fact that he features older people so often, and that like in romantic and sexual scenarios where he like doesn't forget that like older people like still have like sexual energy, and that like it's not any different, and that like I just really appreciate that he treats older women and older men as like still being sexy and vital. Like it's not a question to him, and I just like really liked that about his whole filmography.
Yeah, full of passion. There's still feeling a sense of connection towards one another, but also just hear the artistic process and performance and what it all means to get together and have a sense of community. I think that's really kind of beautiful. I mean, I imagine that people who are really invested in theater will get even more out of watching this. Outside of like we both talked about, it probably could have been maybe 10 or 15 minutes shorter and had an even stronger, tighter running time, and maybe I would appreciate it even more. But it's certainly like a stimulating experience of getting to see people like reconnect to their art and feel a sense of joy doing it, and that's inspiring. Like this could definitely like inspire anybody in the theater world to like feel reinvigorated. Like that, like I want to go and put on a play. After seeing this, I can imagine that can happen for sure.
And it felt very playful and small, which is another thing I liked about this movie. Like he just sort of got a bunch of friends together, which is what it seems like they were, because they're all people he's collaborated with closely on throughout his career. It seems like he just got a bunch of friends together and was like, let's have fun with this. Because it really mostly takes place in one room that has like some different staging areas. But it seemed very small scale and just kind of like a fun experiment that he was doing with friends that I appreciated. So it's like not like a huge important film, but I feel like he had a lot of fun with it. And I really liked that about it. It just felt very fun.
Yeah, and I think that's what's kind of interesting, as we've talked about, is this with age, his work became more fun in some ways. And I don't know if that means more accessible. We haven't seen every single thing, but it's just curious to me that, he, as time went on, didn't feel like, oh, the world and humanity, things are getting worse. He's not weary or just like, like a curmudgeon or something. He's kind of like finding beauty and a lot to appreciate about art and self-expression and filmmaking and all these things that we love. But I feel like, maybe over time he just kind of said, I've told some pretty dark and heavy stories and dealt with trauma quite a bit. Maybe now I'm just gonna, let a story unfold and not think that it has to be this, enigmatic puzzle that his early work was, because he's already been there and had that approach. But I bet like some like diehard fans might find, his later work maybe a little bit slight in some regards too. Like me, I was kind of primed for more puzzles.
Yeah.
And that's not to say like these are bad movies either. They were just different and unexpected and interesting in their own right, for sure.
Well, that's why I feel strange about Wild Grass, because like I was saying, when I was watching it, I was like, I don't know, this seems like almost like frothy and like not very serious. But then afterward, especially after that jarring ending, I like was forced to kind of sit with it and think about it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that I came to any conclusions, but like some of the imagery and like the thoughts that I had watching it just stuck with me a lot more than I thought they would. And the same with Providence and really all of them. But I just think, yeah, I think he was still very serious and very intellectual, and just sort of started focusing on like maybe just like more about what art does instead of focusing on like history and trauma. Like maybe he'd gotten that out of his system a little bit.
Yeah, I like that. Because, I mean, You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet is more of like we've talked about, more of an experiment or formal exercise, which to me doesn't make it like an essential work if you're trying to understand Resnais's place in film history. But it still has its pleasures. It's still worth seeing. It's still got, like, I mean, some people would have even thought like, well, if this is his last movie, this is probably a good place to end things, Mm-hmm. It could be like it could feel like a swan song in a way, but even at the time, like it might have been at one of those film festivals that he showed it as, like, oh no, I don't want to quit just yet. Don't think this is my last movie. Like he didn't want to commit to that, and he did make one more after this that I haven't seen called Life of Riley. That was his last film. But
this is all making me think of one other thing that I was thinking about. As I was watching his movies, like one other theme that I noticed is that he became sort of preoccupied, I think, with dying and the duration of death. I feel like this is a theme that came up in a bunch of them, and I feel like it sort of played out in his own filmography in a way where I don't know. I feel like that might have been why he got a little lighter. He was like, I don't know exactly, but in Providence, that's a major theme, I feel like.
Oh, sure.
And I feel like it came up elsewhere too, where he's just kind of like, it makes you think about like when is it that you start dying exactly? Like, and when. And it's a good question. I don't know. Like there's a point where you get maybe that, like a diagnosis. And I think this came up in Je T'aime also. And maybe I think his girlfriend in that also has sort of a terminal illness.
Right.
Yeah, just like the quality of living, the quality of dying, and when you sort of make the distinction between the two. And like for someone who's obsessed with time, it's just like, it's a pretty logical thing to think about, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, especially like what it means when our time is up and how we don't always know when that'll be. And it's like, there's a lot of heavy thoughts that can come with some of his later films too. And I'm not dismissing them as slight. I just feel like maybe it's possible that some people could come away with that because you're primed to think one way about his work and then suddenly it kind of shifts into something else. It doesn't mean like the themes aren't still there. It's just the execution is very different. And I still found it intriguing to where I know we couldn't and didn't cover every single title, but I'm certain that there will be at least a few more within my lifetime that I'll want to check out and see, especially since, kind of last minute, a coworker of mine at work mentioned a short film that he made, which is, of course, I'm not going to bother trying to pronounce the French title, but the English translation is All the Memory in the World. And it is about the National Library of France.
Oh, wow.
And that's why I wanted you to watch this with Maureen, but it wasn't a big obligation. Don't worry about it, but it is unbelievably great. Like, I was floored by this because it just, like, the score, the still shots of people looking at certain departments of the library at one point were just like, oh my God, they're treating a library like it is everything. Like it is like we need libraries in order to survive. Kind of like a declaration of like, all our memories are here in this building. like just he made it so profound and like just kind of like overwhelming, and the score is like so heavy and intense. It's just kind of like, man, I mean, the idea of libraries at that point, like in the 50s, they were treating them as more than like a museum, but just kind of like a necessity for humanity. And I know Chris Marker and Agnes Varda collaborated with him on this. So
Oh wow.
it's
Oh yeah, I need to watch it.
it's just I loved it so much. Like, it made me so giddy as I was watching it, because of course they're showing things that I actually work with, you know, like archives and periodicals and maps, and just like, it's library porn is what it is.
Yeah.
And it's so enjoyable, and like the way the narrator is treating this stuff, like it's, you know, like everything is like a Bible or something. I don't know. It's just kind of a remarkable short film that I'm pretty sure everybody can just find on YouTube. I think it's also available on I want to say last year at Marion Bad Kino Blu-ray as well. It's like a bonus feature. So definitely watch All the Memory in the World short, and of course Night and Fog as well. If you haven't, I'm assuming a lot of people have. But Kate, if you had to rank your top 3 Resnais films, what would they be? Because this is hard.
I mean, I definitely Hiroshima. I just think that movie is incredibly special. And it's also just as like, I mean, my wife Maureen was watching this with me, and she's a photographer, and she was just noting like how beautiful the photography in that movie is, and like it's just very stunning in a way that I don't know that any of his other movies match. Although like, yeah, well, maybe Marian Bod, but I don't know. Everything about that movie is just perfect to me. So probably Hiroshima in number 1 spot. I do think, and I still think that Marian Bod is probably number 2, because I love Delphine Seyrig. I think she's just like fascinating to watch in anything that she does. And I think the like sort of incantatory, just like fever dream nature of that film is like really incredible to me. What would number 3 be though? That's a hard position. I feel like I would put Je t'aime in that spot. Yeah.
Very close.
Yeah.
Man, again, like the same 3 movies, but the ranking is so hard. Because I guess it's one of those cases of depending on which one I'm watching, maybe they're all number 1, but I'll go with Last Year at Marion Bad at number 3, Hiroshima Mon Amour at number 2, and number 1, Je t'aime. But like, really, I mean, gosh, I mean, they're all masterpieces in my mind, especially the more I go back to them. And I think maybe Je t'aime was just like the biggest surprise when I first saw it, in that like I instantly loved it, and I instantly felt a lot while watching it, and certainly like just loved the structure of it. And I think time travel is fascinating, and it does, as we were talking about it more and more too, I was just like, yeah, it does sort of like, it does feel like an encapsulation of his process and the way he thinks, and all the things I love about film and filmmaking kind of wrapped up into one. But gosh, what a filmmaker. Good Lord.
Yeah. I really appreciated diving into Resnais, because I feel like he says a lot of the same things from movie to movie, but
Sure.
He honestly does it very differently from movie to movie. Like he's really trying to figure out like the best way to say it, or like try to find all the different ways to say it through his medium. And it's just very fun to like hang out with him as a director, and just like, I don't know, it's like reading essays in a way where it's all just very thought provoking. And it just, I don't think he identified it as an auteur really. But
no, he actually didn't. I saw like a quick little interview where he's like,
yeah, yeah, he didn't, which I respect, but I definitely appreciate the perspective, and just his like certain preoccupations, which I guess I love him because those are also my preoccupations. I think I'm very interested in history and memory and how those things map onto people, individual people, and also like societies, and how human emotions play out onto all of that. Because that's like where it all starts, I think, is just human emotion. And so I think he's just a fabulous director and like a brilliant director for really the way he addresses those themes, and the way he understands cinema as a medium is just very, very special.
I would concur 100%. I just, again, I like filmmakers that are more about the feeling and not necessarily like, oh, this story has to make sense or everything has to flow together from point A to point B to point C. It's more about what the viewer is feeling, what the characters are feeling, and he's clearly interested in that experience of telling a story. But it's just, yeah, there's also just like the complexity of human emotions throughout all of his work, you know, just the guilt, the longing, the displacement, the trauma, all of that, especially like, yeah, his early work really kind of sums up even things that we're still feeling and wrestling with and dealing with as a society on this planet to this day. You know, like I said, I think it was very interesting almost immediately going from Zone of Interest and Oppenheimer to watching Night and Fog and then Hiroshima Mon Amour. I was just kind of like, huh.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not stop thinking about Night and Fog when I was watching Zone of Interest.
Yeah, no kidding. And it's, yeah, I know people often say, well, what else kind of stories can you tell about the Holocaust? Blah, blah, blah. You know, oh no, you still can. I don't know. I don't think that's going to go away. I mean, some people can make the argument too that I think we even talked about this in the last episode about like, is it morally or ethically good to tell a story the way the director of Son of Saul decided to tell that story? I can't. I'm not here to cast judgment. I'm here to experience the work, and I certainly found it to be a valuable experience that got to me in every way possible. So again, movies for me are about feelings and the emotional experience, and that's, you'll definitely have one watching something like Son of Saul or Zone of Interest. But I'm grateful that you were game for this. I'm curious to, you know, next year talk with you again about another filmmaker. It doesn't necessarily have to be French New Wave either. So we'll parse that out over time. We'll figure out what we want to talk about next, and you know, maybe we'll see if we can make it in person too, if we can. But if not, I am so grateful for your time and what you brought to the conversation.
I'm always grateful to be invited. It's always really fun to talk about movies with you.
Thank you. I feel the same way. Where can people find you? I know you're on Letterboxd, right?
I am on Letterboxd, and I don't spend a whole lot of time there, but I'm always trying to be better about it. So let me see. What is my username? Yeah, hold me accountable. Make me more present on Letterboxd.
I'll have listeners write to you. Hey, why have you updated your Letterboxd recently?
What is my username? I think it's the same as my Twitter username, which is swamp_witch, with the witch, the I in witch being a 1. So that
mysterious.
Yeah.
I'll link to it in the show notes regardless.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that.
And stay tuned, everybody, because like I said, in about a month, you got an epic, probably 6 or 7 hour episode where Colin Suter and Eric Childress and I, we get a little wacky and we talk about nearly every film that's come out in a certain year. We go through every month, and I can't believe we continue this tradition. And it's kind of an intimidating experience, but it's also something I've looked forward to and value, especially hearing what my friends have to say about films from a certain year. And going back to seeing how we feel about them now is always really interesting, because I just recently rewatched Leon the Professional, and I don't think I like that movie. I mean, I don't know.
I don't think I like it either. It's been a long time since I saw it, though.
Yeah, there's just now I feel creeped out, and understandably so. But still, it's like
where Natalie Portman's troubles started.
Yeah, and so like that's something that I take into account. So it's interesting to go back now, watching a movie that was made 30 years ago, and there's things like transphobia in Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, or like it's just kind of an interesting experience, and I'm glad we get to do it. I'm glad, as kind of daunting it can be, and certainly we never ever get to every title. It's kind of impossible, but we try just cover the notable ones, and I know people look forward to that episode. I try to edit it far more than I do the regular episodes too, by like inserting clips and trailers and fun stuff and songs from that year. So everybody has that to look forward to in early March. So stay tuned and visit directorsclubpodcast.com and send me an email to directorsclubpodcast@gmail.com. And I look forward to having Kate back on next year, and we'll talk more soon. Thanks everybody for listening. Bye-bye.